Something I like to do when I'm mixing is at the very beginning, I play the song through while I'm getting my balance and panning everything to where I think it should go. But I have to literally, while I'm doing this, focus on what's weird and focus on what the strengths are. Sometimes they're not the same thing. A lot of times, if you look at like a band like Zeppelin, for example, Robert Plant's voice I would call weird, but also a strength because he had such a great voice, but it's certainly different. It didn't sound like a lot of other people's stuff when you heard that for the first time. But a strength of that band is also John Bonham's drumming. Amazing drums. Now, really, it's just super tight, but such groove and such feel, and also kind of interesting stuff there too. But I wouldn't call it weird. I'd almost call it just really, really a strong point, right? And you can't deny JPJ's amazing bass lines, which were basically, there's so little top end on so many of the Zeppelin bass lines. There's just a lot of lows, and it sounds so good. But what I'm saying is, if the guy who went into mixing that was comparing, who Glyn Johns worked on a lot of that stuff, right? So if he went in comparing to what other people were doing at the time, it wouldn't have sounded like that. The reason it sounds so good is because he focused on the strengths and what was weird about it and decided that was going to guide him down what he should do next. Without taking note to first understand what's going on in terms of the strengths and the weirdness, you don't really know what the balance should be, because there's such a sweet spot of, acceptability between more or less in any given department. And what's going on those albums a lot of times is the guitars don't occupy a ton of the frequency spectrum. The bass and the drums take up most of the room, and the guitars just kind of sit on top. There's not a whole lot of lows or low mids or anything going on. There's just some top, but it feels nice and thick and giant because the drums are really driving those. The bass and the drums take up so much space that they anchor the whole thing. And then between the vocals and the guitar, they sort of complement each other. And the way that was put together, in my opinion, there was thought that went into, these drums are so strong, we got to make them take up the amount of space they deserve. And it's not the way you would mix everything. This brings up other thoughts. My own band, what I noticed was I would want certain things out of drum sounds on certain songs because in my head, my band was a certain way. Whereas the drummer, in his head, the band was a certain way. And it wasn't the same way. A lot of times, the drummer may be thinking these giant, big drums are what they are. That's who they are as a drummer. They hear big, giant drum sounds. Whereas a lot of times I hear tight 70s, kit sounds really kind of dry. I love that. And to play something with that's like that and make it sound the way I hear in my head, you have to play lightly. You can't be a slammer. You can't hit super hard. A lot of those songs that I love that are tracked in that way, the drums are delicately played, which allows them to work. It allows them to sound the way you picture in your head when you picture dry 70s drum sounds. The Kinks did it a lot. I love the way a lot of the Kinks drums sound on, like, the song Power Man is one of my favorite songs. That's a good example of that, I think. But also, what was the Radiohead album they did? I can't remember the name of the album, but there's one with two fishes on it. That song, and it's just like some of the drums on Radiohead stuff sound so good, but also dry, dead, and tight. And the reason is the drummer is playing with so much like tasty flavor and lightly, which allows you to do different things when you're miking this stuff up to get the drums to sound fatter, but also dead and not with a lot of room sound on it. Whereas in contrast to that, I also love stuff like the Chili Peppers. And when you think about Give It Away, that's a big drum sound in a very wet room. I think it was recorded in a solarium or something that was like all marble or something. So the point is, marble and glass, I think, coated the room. I'm not sure, but something like that. That's what I remember from the Brendan O'Brien interview. 4 mics and lots of room sound. That's the opposite of the other thing. But what I'm saying is, if I have in my head, I want dead, tight 70s drums, but the drummer wants to play big, loud, smacking drums that have a lot of room on them, well, there's never, the twain are going to meet here. It's just not going to line up. And I think that's a big thing, is like when you go into working on stuff, if the goal of the song was to have tight 70s drums. The performance needs to align with that. And then in the mixing stage, it should the thought process of the mixer should align with that. They shouldn't then try to make the drums sound big and put rooms on them and put reverbs on them. And what happened in the session and what is the strength or weakness of what was recorded, like the strength of it should become that should lead you down the path of what to do. And the same thing with the weirdness. If there's something weird about it, feature the weirdness. Ride up those weird moments. If the guitar, like, plugs in during a take and it sounds all crazy and then it plugs in, sometimes you want to ride those up. I know a lot of guys that would go through songs and pull up all the weird feedback moments. Like if there was some weird feedback at some point that sound, pull that up, pull up everything that was weird. The singer coughing before they're about to sing, pull that up. Like automate all the weirdness before they even started the mix, because that would inform their decision on what to do also. They're just trying to like pull out as much of the unique things that went on these particular recordings that day for this band, and that makes it unique. Too many people, I think, try to make stuff sound like other things. It's the worst thing an artist could do is tell you, hey, can you make me sound like this? I think it's terrible. I hate that, because you're just sort of putting yourself in a box where it'll never be as good as the original thing. Like most copies, just picture making a bunch of copies of something. It's never as good as the original, ever. It always goes down in quality every time you try to copy the original. So don't do that. Just be who you are. Be original. Go for your own sound and be open to hearing whatever that is. Because that's the other thing I think is a lot of people want control over their sound in a way like I might have wanted tight 70s drums, but if it's not what the players are thinking and if everybody's not on the same page, it's not going to happen. And I never explained myself very well when it came to that, because it takes years to really understand, why doesn't this sound the way I want? Oh, because he's hitting the drums like, somebody who's playing it like an Alice in Chains song. And Alice in Chains drums sound huge. It's very different than, a tight kit that sounds like it was done in a dry room with absolutely no decay and everything sounds right in your face, which sometimes I like a lot, but if the drummer ain't on that page, you ain't going to make that happen, because it's really hard to get that with splat drums that are played extremely loud. A lot of guys record in a very dead room and then make the stuff sound super alive and bright and lively. I actually don't prefer that. I mean, it took me years to hone my ears into the fact that, like, you can do that and it's okay for some people, but I actually prefer when a drum's recorded in a dead room, make it dead. It sounds better. Lean into the dead. When it's recorded in a room that's super loud and bright and reverbed, use that. But don't sort of try to get dead out of a room that's tons of brightness on it, and then don't try to get bright out of a dead room, in my opinion, because I don't like the sound of that artificialness. So anyway, personal taste and the way you like your stuff to sound or want, there's always somebody who cares about all the instruments. And then there's the guy that just plays drums, for example, who may only care about his instrument. And that's a real battle of wills, because you almost need the entire band to care about the entire sound in order to achieve something that, is like the vision in your head. Far too often, the players only care about their own instrument. So you really got to figure out who you're dealing with. The reason the Beatles were as good as they were is because everybody cared about everything. You got a guy like Ringo who's playing the perfect part for the song to make the song great, and everyone's on the same page. You get John Lennon, you get George, you get Paul. They could all, amazing musicians doing everything they can, not for their part to stand out, but for the song to be as great as possible. And their method was whoever's song it was got to run the show in terms of final call on what should happen, that should go, this should go. Whoever wrote the song, whoever brought it in. That's an interesting way to go too, because that way somebody can't be like, no, I love my part and it has to be played like this. And then that just takes the song in a completely opposite direction. And then, they're never happy with it. It's, the amount of times things get recorded that people aren't happy with from the songwriter's perspective, I feel like is a lot. And a lot of it has to do with communication, and a lot of it has to do with everybody being on the same page within the band. It's I probably far more often, and I'm just thinking about my own experience with my own songs, far more often do you record stuff that turns out sounding completely different than the way you wanted, which is why I got into doing this in the first place, to be honest with you, because I was obsessed with the fact that I would record, and why doesn't it sound the way I want it to sound? What am I not in control of? Like, what am I not speaking about? What am I not directing this thing towards being? What is missing? Is it the mixer? Is it the producer? So many times I would have those kind of mental battles with myself. Like, what is missing? Why isn't it what it is? And that brought me down this rabbit hole of where I am now, of figuring out every part of what makes what, and how much influence a mixer really has, and how much influence a producer has, and how much influence the whole thing has from jump to the end, and just trying to really figure out how to get it the way I want. And I was obsessed with it, and that's how I got here. So anyway, I'm curious how you guys got where you guys got, because a lot of us probably came from the same boat. I just have a feeling. But anyway, questions, answers, comments, throw it in there. I appreciate it. Hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Evan Jaffe Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.